I never thought there would come a day when my own son-in-law would say something like that. Now that your wife is dead, mourn her, pack your bags, and never come back. Ethan spoke with a sharp finality, as if he were reading a verdict he had been waiting to deliver. I sat there, my hand trembling on the oak table Eleanor and I had chosen more than 30 years ago. His words fell like a hammer, and the room went silent, so still that even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to stop. That dinner happened right after Eleanor's memorial. I was still in the old black suit, the scent of carnations from the service still clinging to my sleeves. The house I knew by heart suddenly felt strange. The whole family gathered around the oak table, the same one that had seen so many Thanksgivings, Christmases, and warm suppers Eleanor always prepared in the kitchen. But tonight she was not here. There was only the empty chair at the head of the table where she used to sit, her gentle smile, her soft voice asking me if I wanted more mashed potatoes. Every time my eyes strayed to that emptiness, another crack opened inside me. Clara, my only daughter, sat across from me. She wore a simple black dress, her blonde hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. That same hair I used to smooth back when she was a child, but her eyes refused to meet mine. From the moment dinner began, Clara never once looked straight at me. She kept her head down, nudging the food on her plate, sometimes glancing at her husband as if waiting for a signal. I searched her face for warmth, for family, but all I saw was silence and avoidance. Ethan was different. Sitting beside Clara, he looked confident, his hand lifting a glass of wine as if this were a celebration instead of a meal after a funeral. Since Eleanor's death, I noticed how at ease he seemed, his voice heavier but not from grief, from a new sense of power. I had never trusted him much. As a young lawyer with ambition in his veins, Ethan was used to bending situations with words. I had stayed quiet, telling myself Clara loved him, and Eleanor often told me not to be too hard on him. But the moment he spoke that sentence, I finally saw the man he really was. The room grew colder. I looked around. On the wall still hung the wedding picture of Eleanor and me, framed in wood I had carved with my own hands. We had married in the small town church, and this house became the heart of our lives ever since. I remembered Eleanor sewing by the fireplace on rainy nights, the little chair I built for Clara when she turned 5, the day we painted the living room with a shade called Morning Mist just because Eleanor liked the name. All those memories rushed back at once. And now someone was telling me to leave, as if 36 years of building a life here was nothing but a performance no one needed anymore. I wanted to speak, but my throat tightened. Before I could, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold. You know, this house was always under Eleanor's name. Now that she is gone, everything changes. Your staying here will only make things harder. Clara and I will handle it. You should find a place more suited to your age. His words were clear, deliberate, leaving no room to fight. I turned to Clara, hoping she would object, or at least show hesitation. But she only pressed her lips together, her eyes unfocused. She said nothing. No defense, no protest. My chest clenched. I remembered holding her in my arms, walking her to school, working late hours so she could attend college in Portland. All of it now felt like a thin mist that vanished when I reached for it. Between us stood a distance no love could fill. The air in the room thickened. I could hear the faint clink of utensils against plates, though no one ate. I drew a breath, pressing my hand flat against the table to stay calm. Inside me rose a pain deeper than Eleanor's death. Death was inevitable. But this cold betrayal from my own blood and the man I once tried to accept as a son crushed me. Ethan, I said, my voice hoarse yet steady, you are telling me that after all these years living here, after all that Eleanor and I built, I have no place in my own house. Ethan smirked, as if I had asked something foolish. You are right. This house was tied to Eleanor, but she is gone. You have to be realistic. The best thing is for you to move somewhere more suitable, maybe a retirement home where you will be taken care of. This is no longer your place. I heard each word like iron striking. His tone was decisive, leaving no sliver of hope. Clara remained silent, her hands clasped in her lap. For an instant, I caught a flicker of unease in her eyes, but it disappeared. I knew then she had chosen her husband's side. I straightened, letting my gaze sweep across the room one last time, as if to carve every detail into memory. The window where Eleanor once stood to watch her roses, the cabinet I had built, the soft yellow lamp she loved. I realized I had not only lost my wife, but I had lost my home and the very sense of belonging. No one spoke again. Ethan poured himself more wine, his eyes indifferent. Clara kept her head down, her face pale, and I sat frozen. It felt as though I had just been cast out of my own life. That night, I went upstairs alone. The bedroom still held the scent of Eleanor's perfume, her bottles lined neatly on the dresser. I sat on the bed, my hands over my face, and for the first time since the funeral, I broke down. I cried not only for Eleanor, but for myself, for a husband, for a father who had suddenly become unnecessary. But somewhere in the stream of tears, something stirred. I did not know what to call it, only that a seed had been planted. Ethan believed I was just an old man, easy to push aside. Clara thought my voice no longer mattered, but I knew Eleanor trusted me more than that. And if she were still here, she would never allow me to be erased from this house so easily. I lifted my head and wiped my tears. In the faint reflection of the wooden wardrobe, I saw a tired, aging face, but my eyes were different now. There was a light in them that Ethan had never seen. If you are still reading this, tell me which city you are watching from. I want to know how far my story has traveled. And if you wish to walk with me on this journey, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss what comes next. I was born and raised in Salem, Oregon, in an ordinary family. My father was a carpenter. He had a small workshop behind the house. And from the time I was a boy, I grew familiar with the smell of freshly cut wood, the steady rasp of the plane, and the sunlight streaming through piles of boards, stacked one after another. I followed in my father's footsteps. But unlike him, I worked not just for family, but for the community. For years, I was the one local schools, churches, and even City Hall hired to build desks, pulpits, and bookcases. My hands grew calloused, my shoulders stiff, but I carried pride in knowing my work stood in every corner of town. In my younger years, I never thought much about money. After finishing each job, I collected the pay and brought it home to Eleanor. She kept the books and managed every expense. My role was to work, earn, and trust that it was enough. Eleanor had a gift for making ends meet, always finding a way for a carpenter's modest income to cover everything our family needed. It was her savings that allowed Clara to attend private school and later college. Eleanor was the pillar of our family. She never complained, never let me worry about finances. I remember once when my workshop lost a big contract. I came home worried, but she only smiled, set a hot plate of roast in front of me and said, "You just do your work well. I will take care of the rest." I trusted her completely. Those years, our life was simple but full of love. I would wake before sunrise, head to the shop while the sky was still dark, the sound of my saw keeping rhythm with the smell of Eleanor's coffee drifting from the kitchen. When Clara was little, she often ran out to the shop, sitting on piles of sawdust with wide eyes watching me work. She preferred the wooden toys I made to anything plastic from a store. I once built her a wooden horse, and she rode it across the yard, laughing as if the whole world belonged to her. But time moved on. Clara grew up. The school carried her farther away from my arms. When she went off to college in Portland, the house fell quiet. Eleanor and I were alone, but we did not grieve. She said it was the way of things, that children must leave the nest, and our duty was to give her the best foundation we could. I nodded and kept working, kept saving. Everything began to change when Clara met Ethan. From the very first introduction, I felt a distance between us. Ethan was polite but cold, a man who calculated every word. I tried to connect with him through stories of carpentry, but he only nodded while checking his watch. Eleanor, with her gentle spirit, tried to bridge the gap with meals she prepared, and Clara glowed while speaking of her fiancé's success. I stayed quiet, telling myself that as long as my daughter was happy, I would endure. After Clara married, I noticed she came home less often. Sunday dinners, once a family tradition, faded away. At first, Ethan was too busy with work. Then they needed to spend time with his family, until finally, Clara seemed to have no reason to visit at all. Eleanor would console me, "Bob. Do not blame her. She has her own family now." I nodded, but the emptiness in me only grew. When Eleanor was diagnosed, I left work behind to stay at her side. Those last years were a time of caring, of learning to cook her favorite meals. learning to brew tea exactly how she liked it. I never once felt exhausted, because my love for her was greater than any burden. My only fear was not having enough time. Many nights I sat by her method, listening to her labored breathing, my chest tightening with each sound. Yet whenever she opened her eyes, she still gave me a smile. As long as you are here, I am at peace. Clara did visit, but not often. And when she came, she brought Ethan, always distracted by her phone. I knew Ethan disliked the hospital air, and Clara followed his lead. Many times I wanted to speak out, but Eleanor stopped me. Bob, do not make it harder for her. She is still young, she does not understand yet. I listened, but another crack opened inside me. One night as I tucked the blanket around her, Eleanor gripped my hand tightly. Her voice was weak but steady. Bob, if something happens to me, promise you will live for yourself for once. Do not spend your life only worrying about others. Remember, you deserve a life of your own. I wept when she said that. All those years I had thought only of providing for my wife and child, never once of myself. Eleanor knew it, and she wanted me to change when she was gone. The day she passed, I felt a part of my soul leave with her. The funeral was simple yet crowded. Pastors, teachers, and former students all came to honor the kind woman she had been. I stood by the grave, cold wind whipping through, hearing again the promise I made. But only a week later, I was pushed out of the house I had built brick by my own son-in-law, while my daughter sat in silence like a stranger. I thought of my whole life, from a boy learning to plane wood, to the long years of labor, to now standing alone in the shell of what once was love and family. I wondered if all my sacrifices meant anything, when in the end, I was cast aside as if I were nothing. But in the depths of that despair, I remembered Eleanor's words. She wanted me to live for myself, and I understood that to do so, I could not surrender to Ethan's coldness or Clara's silence. Looking back, I realized it had never happened overnight. Ethan did not suddenly turn cruel after Eleanor died, and Clara did not become distant from her father all at once. The signs had been there for years. I was simply too busy, too trusting, too eager to keep the peace to see them. Now each detail returns to me like shards of broken glass, sharp and cold in my mind. The first time I felt pushed aside was one summer, 3 years after Clara and Ethan married. Both families had planned a trip to the coast in Lincoln City. I had been excited. I pictured Eleanor walking along the sand collecting shells, and me grilling fish with Clara by my side. But a few days before the trip, Clara called. Her voice faltered. Dad, I think you should stay home this time. Ethan says the schedule is full of outdoor activities, maybe too much for someone older. I do not want you to be uncomfortable. I stayed quiet. I was 63 then, still strong enough to carry wood and work full days in the shop. Yet my daughter thought I could not manage a trip to the beach. I did not argue. I only wished them well. Then came the next Christmas. Our tradition for generations was gathering around the oak table, but Clara said, Dad, this year we are eating at Ethan's parents' house. They expect us, and I cannot refuse. I nodded, but inside I felt the emptiness. Year after year, the tradition dissolved. Clara only stopped by Salem if she had business, and Ethan rarely stayed long. Once, Ethan threw a large birthday party for Clara in Portland. My invitation arrived late, and when I showed up, the room was filled with his friends and colleagues, yet not one person from my side of the family. I sat quietly in the corner, trying to smile. All evening, Ethan introduced me as the father-in-law, a retired carpenter. The way he pressed on, retired, stung, as if my life meant nothing beyond building church benches. Clara laughed, holding his hand, and I told myself she did not notice. But I remembered every word. There were countless family decisions where I was left out entirely. When Clara and Ethan bought their first house, I only learned when the housewarming invitation came. When they changed jobs, bought cars, or even made investments, no one asked my opinion. Yet I knew with a lifetime of experience, I could have offered sound advice. But to Ethan, I was not a voice worth hearing. Eleanor noticed before I did. Once, as we sat on the porch, she said softly, Bob, do you see? Ethan always wants Clara away from us. He avoids family dinners. He does not want her coming back often. I sighed, trying to ease her worry. Maybe he just wants independence, to make his own traditions. But Eleanor only looked at me, sadness in her eyes. You always forgive too easily, but I can see it clearly. Little by little, we will be pushed out. I shook my head, refusing to believe her. Now her words echo endlessly in me. What cut me deepest was Clara's change. As a child, she clung to me. I remember one day she came home crying after a bad math grade. She ran into the shop, and I held her close, telling her that when I was her age, I had already left school to work. So grades were not everything. She lifted her face, tears streaking, but with a smile breaking through. And now, when I try to speak with her, Clara answers short, glancing at her husband as if waiting for his nod. The bond between father and daughter was covered by a shadow I could not fight. I began to see that for years I had already been treated as an outsider in my own family. At the time, I could not admit it. The truth hurt too much. I comforted myself, believing my daughter still loved me, believing Ethan was only stiff, believing things would settle. But the truth was clear. I had been erased from the very picture of family I had built with my own hands. One night, when Eleanor was weak, I cleaned her room. In the bottom drawer, I found a small wooden box, locked. It was walnut wood, polished smooth, carved with delicate patterns by hand. I knew immediately it was mine, made long ago in my youth. Yet Eleanor had kept it and locked it away. I held it in surprise, trying to open it, but the key was gone. I remember her frail hand pressing mine, her whisper, "Bob, the day will come when you must open it." But not now. I asked no more. That box still lies in my desk drawer beside my bed. Since Eleanor's passing, I have sat many nights with my hand resting on the cold wood, as if touching memory itself. I have not dared to break the lock, partly out of respect for her words, partly out of fear. Fear of what it might hold, fear it would hurt more than I could bear. Yet some nights, I believe it carries her last message, the path she left for me when she could no longer walk beside me. The signs of distance, the coldness, had been there all along. I only saw them clearly after losing Eleanor and hearing Ethan's merciless command. It was as if every shard finally fell into place, revealing the picture I had not wanted to face. I had become an outsider in my own family, and Ethan had prepared to push me from Clara's life cleanly and legally. I sat alone in the dim room, the desk lamp casting shadows across the wall, the wooden box resting in the drawer. I knew the day would come when I would have to open it, and when I did, I would also unlock the truth of my own life, a truth Ethan and Clara never expected. After that dinner, I did not argue, not a word of resistance. I simply stood up, quietly walked upstairs, letting Ethan believe the old man had given in completely. My heart was in turmoil, but the more I thought, the more I remembered Eleanor's words before she passed. "Bob, if something happens to me, live for yourself for once." At the time, I thought she only meant for me to endure the loneliness. Now I understood she had seen ahead of me what I had not dared to see. In the days that followed, I did not touch my belongings. I let Ethan and Clara believe I had accepted leaving. I overheard them whispering in the kitchen about changes they wanted in the house, tearing down the living room wall, retiling the kitchen floor, and hiring an interior designer. Each plan cut into my memories like a blade, but I stayed silent because I knew I had to prepare, and prepare in silence. One early morning, I drove my old pickup to the First Oregon Bank branch, where Eleanor and I had done business for over 30 years. I rarely went in person because Eleanor always took care of it. I only remembered her coming home with neat stacks of papers for the cabinet and telling me, "Everything is fine, Bob." Inside the bank, the smell of polished wood and carpet felt unfamiliar. The branch manager, Helen Morris, recognized me at once. She had known Eleanor for years. Her eyes were full of sympathy when I told her Eleanor had passed. "I am so sorry, Mr. Whitaker." Eleanor was wonderful. She was careful and thorough. I nodded, keeping my voice calm. "Helen, I need to know where I stand financially." The truth is, Eleanor managed everything. I never looked at the paperwork. Now she is gone, and I do not know where to begin. Helen invited me to sit and type at her keyboard. Then she paused, brows raised. "Mr. Whitaker, I believe Eleanor never told you everything. Beyond the joint account for daily expenses, there are several others." I held my breath. "Others?" Helen printed a file and slid it across the desk. I saw Eleanor's signature and my own. At first, I could not recall signing, then realized they were those times Eleanor asked me to sign updates or interest adjustments. I had never paid attention. And now here was proof that Eleanor had created a trust, with me as the sole beneficiary. There was also a savings account in her name, with more money than I had ever imagined she could set aside. Helen explained gently, Eleanor was meticulous. For years, she moved small amounts here. No one noticed, but over time it grew. I sat still, papers trembling in my hands. Even in illness, Eleanor had thought of me. While I had been worrying over her meals, she was quietly building a shield against the storms she knew might come. I left the bank that day with the thick file tucked in my case. Outside in the sun, I felt dizzy. Part of me hurt that Eleanor had not trusted me enough to tell me, or perhaps she feared I would refuse because I was used to living simply. But above all, I felt grateful. She believed the day would come when I needed this, and she had been right. That night, I sat in my small study, the file spread on the desk. I dared not let Clara or Ethan see it. I knew if they found out, they would never stop until they seized control. I needed someone I could trust. Only one name came, Frank Delaney. Frank had been my friend since high school. We had played basketball together behind the gym, then gone our separate ways. I became a carpenter, he became a lawyer. Still, we stayed in touch, sometimes sharing a beer in the small bar downtown. Frank was steady, slow, loyal. Eleanor trusted him too. I called Frank, my voice rough. Frank, I need to see you, about legal matters, about Eleanor. At once, he knew it was serious. Tomorrow night, the old bar, 7 o'clock. When I arrived, Frank was already there, gray suit worn, beer in hand. His eyes were serious as he watched me. I laid the file on the table and told him everything. The dinner, Ethan's words, Clara's silence, the discovery at the bank. Frank never interrupted, only nodded. When I finished, he opened the file and read it carefully. Bob, he said slowly, Eleanor was wise. She set up a trust. That means these assets are not part of the estate. They belong to you, legally. No one can touch them. Not Clara, not Ethan. I felt a breath of air fill my chest. What about the house, I asked. Frank sighed. The house was in Eleanor's name, so it must pass through probate. Clara is the heir at law. But, he stopped, his eyes piercing mine. If Eleanor left more documents, a will, or any proof, the balance could change. I thought of the wooden box, the locked box in my drawer, the one Eleanor once said I would need to open someday. My heart pounded. Perhaps she had left everything in there. Frank placed a hand on my shoulder. Bob, the most important thing is silence. Do not let anyone know what you have found. Ethan is a lawyer. He will twist it the moment he senses something. Let him believe you have given up. Only when you hold the proof should you act. I nodded. I understood. My life had been built on hammer and saw. I was not a man of words, but I knew how to wait, how to prepare. Now I would use that craft for my own fate. From that day, I lived like a ghost in my own house. I ate meals with them, listening as they planned new paint and remodels. But inside me burned a secret. I stored the file, met Frank weekly, and studied inheritance law. I did not argue with Ethan and did not speak to Clara. I let them believe I was weak, resigned. Because sometimes the strongest reply is not to fight, but to prepare in silence. And in that silence, I began to hear Eleanor more clearly. Not her voice, but the memory she left. Bob, live for yourself for once. I knew the day was coming when I would open that wooden box. And when it opened, everything Ethan believed was his would collapse like sawdust under a sharp blade. I still remember that rainy afternoon when I happened to overhear Ethan on the phone outside. I had just carried my toolbox back from the shop when I saw him standing in the yard, phone in hand, voice low but clear. Yes, I want the house listed this month. We can sign an exclusive contract, but the price must be high. It is an old house, original wood floors, a wide living room, and right in Salem. I am certain someone will pay. I froze, my heart stopped. The house he was talking about was the home Eleanor and I had lived in for over 40 years. Every brick, every beam of wood had my hand on it, and now he wanted to sell it like it was merchandise. I gripped the handle of the box until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to step out, to shout, but then I remembered Frank's warning. Stay silent until you hold everything in your hands. so I stepped back, slipping quietly through the back door. That night, I sat in my study, the small room where I kept old tools and mementos. The yellow lamplight shone on the worn surface of the desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the wooden box Eleanor had left. It sat heavy, silent, as if daring me. For months I had not opened it, afraid, unready. But now things were different. If Ethan was preparing to sell our house, I needed to know what Eleanor had left to protect me. The box was locked. I searched the drawers, the small tins, until finally I found a tiny key tucked beneath a handkerchief embroidered with daisies Eleanor used to keep. I slid the key into the lock and turned. A soft click rang out, as if a door into memory had opened. Inside lay a thick stack of papers held in a brown envelope. In a folded letter, the paper yellowed with age. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope first. Before me was the deed to the woodworking shop, the small workshop on the edge of Salem where I had spent my life. I always believed it was in both our names, but the deed showed clearly. Ownership had been transferred to Robert Whitaker, signed and notarized by Eleanor 3 years earlier. I was stunned, and all my life I thought Eleanor managed the finances, everything under her name. Yet she had quietly given me the one thing that was my soul's work. That shop was not just a livelihood, it was my life. The place Clara grew up in, the smell of fresh wood, the place Eleanor and I planned each season's repairs. Now, with one silent act, Eleanor had made certain it would always be mine. I sank into the chair, tears welling. I reached for the folded letter, her handwriting flowing across the page. My dear Bob, if I am gone, use this to live on. Do not let anyone take it. You have given your whole life to work. To me, to Clara. I know you never kept anything for yourself, but you deserve something that is yours, only yours. The workshop is where you belong, the proof of all your years of sacrifice. You are too gentle, Bob. I fear that when I am gone, someone will think you are easy to cast aside. I do not want that to happen. Keep this. And one day, if you must, use it to remind them that you are not an outsider in this family. With love, Eleanor. I could not hold back. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears falling until the paper was damp. Eleanor, even staring at death, had thought of me. She knew my nature, too gentle, too trusting, always putting family above myself. She feared I would be dismissed, erased, and she had left me a weapon, not of steel but of paper, of truth. I sat for hours in that room, reading the letter again and again until I knew it by heart. I recalled the moments Eleanor had looked at me with eyes full of words she never spoke. Now I understand. She had placed every message into this box. The next day, I brought the deed to Frank. He examined every line, every seal, and finally nodded firmly. Bob, this is solid. No one can touch the workshop. It belongs to you. And this letter, though not legal in itself, is a powerful testimony of Eleanor's intent. If it comes to court, no judge will miss her meaning. I nodded, heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because Eleanor had foreseen this betrayal long ago. Light because she had not left me alone. That evening, I heard Ethan speaking to Clara in the living room. I stood on the staircase, my heart pounding. Clara, you must understand, we cannot let him hold on to this house forever. It was your mother's, and now it is yours by law. We have the right. If we sell, we will have enough for a bigger place in Portland. You want a new office, a bigger yard for the children one day. This is our chance. Clara's voice was small, shaking. But my father, he just lost his wife, Ethan. Ethan cut her off, cold as steel. Clara, do not be weak. He is old, and he will need care soon. This is no longer about feelings. It is about responsibility. We must think of the future. Each word pierced me like a blade. My daughter, the child I once cradled, now sat listening as her husband planned to drive me out, trading me for a larger house, a more comfortable dream. I went back to my room, leaving the lights off, sitting alone in the dark. On the desk lay Eleanor's letter, her handwriting trembling, yet firm. I placed my hand on it and whispered, "You were right, Eleanor. I cannot let them take everything. I must hold on, not just for me, but for you." From that moment, my hesitation was gone. I knew what I would do. I would stay silent, let them believe I was weak. But step by step, I would build a wall from what Eleanor left me. Ethan might be a lawyer, Clara might turn away, but they would never break this fortress because it was built from a lifetime of sacrifice and the love of a woman they never truly understood. That night, for the first time since Eleanor's death, I slept in peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because I knew I finally held something that could protect me. And this time, I would not let anyone touch it. A week later, Ethan sent me a message in a tone close to a command. We need a family meeting to discuss the house. You should be there Saturday, 5 o'clock. I read it and did not reply. I only stared at the words for a long time before setting the phone down. I knew this meeting was nothing more than a stage for Ethan to formally announce that the house would be sold. That afternoon, I sat in the living room in the armchair Eleanor had always loved. Ethan and Clara arrived first, dressed as if for a business deal. Soon, a few relatives from Clara's side appeared. Cousin Sarah, Uncle Jim, and even Martha, a distant cousin who never visited unless property was involved. I saw Ethan's hand in this. The more witnesses, the more confident his control. The oak dining table, once the heart of the home, had become a bargaining table. Ethan took the head seat as if it were his. Clara sat beside him, eyes down, avoiding mine. I sat quietly across from them, a brown case in front of me, Frank's careful work inside. Ethan began, his voice polished but layered with a command. Thank you all for coming. We all know that after Eleanor's passing, this house has become a burden. It is large, costly to maintain, and not fit for a retired man like Mr. Whitaker. Claire and I believe the best option is to sell. With the proceeds, he can move to a senior community with care and amenities. I looked around the table. Some nodded, others stayed silent. Sarah spoke. It makes sense, Uncle Bob. The house is too big, and now you are alone. Her voice dragged as if stating the obvious. Ethan pressed on. We have contacted realtors. They estimate the value at $500,000, a significant sum, enough to give everyone peace of mind. I let him speak. I wanted them to finish, to feel certain. When he stopped, I drew a long breath and slowly placed my case on the table. The click of the lock startled the room. I laid out the first file. Ethan, Clara, and everyone here, I said, my voice steady. I have listened, but before any decision is made, you should know a few truths Eleanor prepared. Ethan frowned, suspicion flickering. Clara raised her head, her face confused. I opened the folder and pulled out the trust papers from First Oregon Bank, notarized and sealed. This is the trust Eleanor created years ago. The sole beneficiary is me. Enough funds for me to live comfortably the rest of my life, without depending on anyone. I paused, holding Ethan's gaze, which means I do not need money from selling this house. The air dropped heavy. I drew out the second envelope, the deed to the woodworking shop. And this, I said firmly, proves the Whitaker shop, where I worked for over 40 years, has belonged to me alone since 3 years ago. Eleanor signed and notarized it legally. No one can touch it. Ethan looked as if struck. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Clara's eyes widened with tears. Finally, I laid down Eleanor's letter, her trembling handwriting plain on the page. This is not a legal document, but it is evidence of intent. Eleanor wrote to me, if I am gone, use this to live on. Do not let anyone take it. She knew someone would try to erase me. She left me both proof and words. The room fell silent. I heard only the clock ticking, the wind at the window. Faces shifted from shock to unease. Martha shook her head softly. My God, Eleanor thought of everything. Ethan clenched his fists, his face red. You cannot use a few papers to deny the fact that this house was in Eleanor's name. By law, Clara inherits. We have the right to decide. I met his stare, calm. Ethan, you are a lawyer. You know what a trust means. You know the weight of notarized documents. You want to talk law, I have the law in my hands. Yes, the house was in Eleanor's name. But remember, she is the one who built the trust, who transferred the shop, who left everything to me. Her intent is clear. I am not the outsider you imagine. Clara rose trembling, her eyes wet. Mother really wrote this? I nodded, sliding the paper to her. She did. And she wanted you to understand family is not a place for calculation. Sarah looked from Ethan to me. Maybe we rushed. Clearly, Eleanor had other intentions. Uncle Bob has his rights. Others nodded, avoiding Ethan's glare. Ethan lost control, leaping up, slamming the table. You are all being fooled. This is the trick of a dying woman and a stubborn old man. I stayed seated, unmoved. Ethan, I said slowly, each word like stone in water. The one fooled all these years is you. Eleanor never trusted you. She saw your greed clearly than anyone. And she prepared so I could sit here today, calm, with proof. I do not need to beg for a place in this family. I have facts. I have the truth. All eyes turned to Ethan. They saw not a confident lawyer, but a man unraveling against an old carpenter who held his ground. In that moment, I knew the balance had shifted. Clara broke into tears, fleeing the table. Ethan stood frozen, lips moving with no words. I gathered the papers back into the case and rose. This family meeting is over. You have seen the truth. I have nothing more to prove. I walked away, leaving silence and stunned faces behind. For the first time in months, I felt I was no longer alone. Eleanor had left me the sharpest weapon, silent but unbreakable. The truth. The room after I left the table fell into a heavy silence, but it lasted only a few seconds before Ethan exploded. He slammed his hand on the oak surface, and the glass rattled, drops spilling over. His face flushed red, his voice hoarse with rage. This is a setup. You took advantage of Eleanor when she was sick, when she was weak, and forced her to sign these things. You could never have done this on your own. Who are you? Just an old carpenter living off his wife. Each word cut like a blade, but I stayed seated, my hand on the case, my eyes fixed on him. I had heard insults like these many times before from strangers, and now from the man I once called son. But unlike before, this time I had proof at my back. And more than that, I had Eleanor in every line she had written. Clara broke down, her hands trembling as she covered her face. Ethan, stop. I did not know. I never knew Mother had written those words. You told me this house would surely be ours, that Father had nothing. Her voice cracked like a child discovering betrayal. Ethan gripped her shoulders, voice lowered but still seething. I did this for us. Do not let them manipulate you. Can you not see? This is theater. Your mother, she was controlled by him. Clara shook her head, tears streaming. No, do not insult my mother. I knew her. She was never controlled by anyone. If she wrote that letter, it was the truth. Martha sighed, her voice slow and final, as if closing the matter. Ethan, you should stop. What Robert has shown are notarized documents, legal proof, and more than that, it is Eleanor's will. We cannot dismiss it for personal ambition. Some relatives nodded, others rose quietly and left. They wanted no part of the ugliness. The look in their eyes no longer aimed at me with pity or doubt, but at Ethan, with disappointment and distance. Ethan lost control, shouting, "You are all blind. He is a fraud. I will not let my name and my work be ruined by a stubborn old man." I stood, gathering the files slowly, my eyes calm. Ethan, I said, my tone no louder than usual but hard as steel. I do not need to destroy you. I do not need revenge. I only bring the truth, and the truth is enough for you to destroy yourself. Eleanor made her choice, and I am only following what she wanted. I need nothing else. The room fell silent again. I heard the clock ticking, Ethan's ragged breath, and Clara's sobs. But I did not waver. I knew my silence was the final cut. The next day, whispers spread through town. People spoke of the family meeting turned storm, how a young lawyer had tried to strip his father-in-law of property and been exposed before his own kin. In the world of law, reputation is everything, and Ethan knew it. A stain in private life was enough to make clients hesitate, enough to change the way colleagues looked at him. Clara did not call me again. I knew she was trapped between blind love for her husband and the truth her mother left behind. But I did not blame her. I did not need her to return with apologies. Everyone must face the weight of their choices. I spent the days after in the workshop, the smell of oak and pine filling the air. I took up the hand plane again, the feel familiar, grounding. In the hum of the saw, I heard Eleanor's voice, soft as ever. Bob, if something happens to me, live for yourself for once. I knew my life had entered a new chapter. Ethan could rage, Clara could weep, relatives could whisper. But the truth had been laid bare, undeniable. and I had chosen silence, letting them collapse in their own fury and greed. Because sometimes silence cuts sharper than any accusation. I left the old house with only a few suitcases, a box of tools, and Eleanor's wooden box. On the day I moved, I stood for a long time at the doorway where she once waved at me each morning. The house that had been filled with laughter now held only silence and fractured memories. But when the door closed behind me, I no longer felt cast out. I felt lighter, as if a weight that had pressed on me for years had finally lifted. The wooden cottage in Cannon Beach was a surprise Eleanor had hidden in the trust. A small home perched on a gentle slope, a dirt road leading to the shore, a line of green pines at its back, oak-paneled walls, wide windows opening to the endless ocean. On my first day inside, I found a woven rug in the corner of the living room, something I knew Eleanor had chosen. I sat down, breathing the mix of salt air and wood, and I knew she was still here in her own way. I rebuilt a workshop in the old garage. The plane, the saw, the chisels, the ruler, all familiar. I began with small things, boxes, picture frames, tiny wooden boats. I carried them to the seaside market on weekends, where tourists wandered between stalls. People stopped, smiled at the simple but sturdy pieces. Some asked how I made them, some bought them instantly, and children clutched the toy boats and would not let go. I had never thought that after all these years, the work I loved would return to me as such quiet joy. Neighbors in Cannon Beach were nothing like Salem. They were warm without being nosy, always greeting with a smile. The woman at the corner cafe gave me a steaming cappuccino on my first visit. The old fisherman at the pier tossed in a few extra shrimp for supper, saying it would brighten the evening. A little girl named Lily from next door came each afternoon, watching me work with wide eyes that shone like Clara's once did. I had never felt so welcomed, so rooted, as I did in this place. At night, I often carried a chair to the porch and faced the sea. Sunsets at Cannon Beach were unlike anywhere else, the sun sinking low, crimson streaks washing over silver shawnies, clouds stretching like oil on canvas. I sat there listening to the tide, my hand resting on Eleanor's wooden box. I had never opened it again, because I knew inside, beyond the papers in the letter, lay her spirit. Each time the sea wind passed, I heard her soft laugh, felt her hand rest on my shoulder. I was no longer the man cast aside at a family table. I was Robert, the carpenter of Cannon Beach, shaping small wooden things that carried a whole heart. I had a house by the sea, a workshop of my own, kind neighbors, and the memory of Eleanor to watch over me. For the first time in decades, I felt free. I heard that Ethan and Clara had to sell their own house just a year after that family meeting. Ethan lost many clients when the story of his greed spread through the community. No one wanted to work with a man who tried to exploit his mother-in-law's death to seize property. The phone calls grew fewer, while the whispers grew louder. Clara, once holding her head high, now avoided relatives quietly. There were no more grand parties or showy vacations, only debt and a house sold in haste to pay it. I felt no joy, no pity. It was only the consequence of their own choices. As for me, I never needed an apology. I never needed them to admit their mistakes. I chose silence, and I chose to live my new life. Each morning I opened the window of the wooden cottage by the sea, breathed deeply, and listened to the waves crash against the rocks. I worked with wood, letting my hands come alive again as they once did. I carried small pieces to the seaside market, where kind faces greeted me. I was seen not for reputation or wealth, but for who I was. Some nights I still dreamed of Eleanor. She sat in the chair beside me, her eyes gentle as if to remind me, "Bob, you did it." I knew then what she had left me was more than a trust, more than a house by the sea. She had left me freedom. Freedom from control, from disdain, from cold commands. Freedom to live for myself. I had lost a house in Salem, but I understood that people can take away a roof, but not the truth and not the memories. Eleanor had given me the most precious thing, freedom. And in that freedom, I found myself again. If you are listening to this story, I want to leave you with something. Make that to place your entire life in someone else's hands. Never surrender your worth to pity or let anyone define how much love you deserve. Prepare for yourself with your work, with your independence, with small but honest things. Because in the end, only you can protect your freedom. Thank you for staying with my story. If you recognize yourself in these lines, leave me a comment and tell me where you are. And do not forget to subscribe so you can hear the next stories. My hope is that whatever loss or betrayal you have endured, you too will find your freedom, just as I found mine by the sea.